The very nature of government seems to have changed since the days of 9/11. In the days following the collapse of the World Trade Center towers, Americans' trust of government was higher than it had been in years. Since that time, the Iraq War, news of domestic spying, and revelations of wrongdoing by government has changed that situation. Today, distrust of government is reaching highs not seen in years. In the last 2 years, Egypt and Libya have fallen into the hands of groups who often ally with groups supporting terrorism against Western interests. In Syria, the rebels President Obama and John McCain aim to support are closely tied to al-Qaeda. Our guest today is John Guandolo. He's a counterterrorism expert, and he directed the creation of the FBI's first counterterrorism training program. He's also a former FBI agent, having worked in the counterterrorism division. He helped clear the rubble at the Pentagon in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. Guandolo has an article out, From 9/11 to Syria: Incompetence, Cowardice, and Treason Among American Leadership. He's also got a new book coming out, Raising a Jihadi Nation. He's here to talk to us about what has happened in the last 10 years to the federal government. Welcome back to WHDT World News, John.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, Gary.
Now, John, what were you thinking as you walked among the shattered wreckage of the Pentagon in 9/11? Let's go back. Let's go back to that fateful day.
Well, I think as I mentioned in the article, there's a sense of deep sadness, but that turned into real anger toward the enemy and the individuals and the nations that participated in 9/11 against us. And over time, as I worked this in the FBI as a special agent and investigated these organizations and groups and came to understand what you and I have discussed previously about Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, really a lack of energy on the part of our leadership to really go after these folks here.
Well, we spoke with Michael Scheuer a few weeks ago, and this is right at the beginning of the talk of attacking Syria, and Scheuer disclosed a secret network inside the United States that is being run by Iran. So I want to talk more about these secret networks in a little bit, but
okay. Let's
talk about American leadership. In the article, you mentioned the complete collapse of leadership in America has come. What do you mean by that?
I think there's just complete catastrophic failure by American leadership, and it really goes across the board. But when we specifically talk about the jihadi threat, it bleeds into the threat from nation states, from hostile organizations, and from the movement, the Islamic movement here in the United States. And it is astonishing, is the only word that comes to mind, but it truly is gross negligence and criminally so, I believe, that the very organizations that we know from evidence are a part of the Muslim Brotherhood network here in the United States that have supported al-Qaeda and Hamas operations. The leaders of those organizations do interface and work with our National Security Council, our president, with FBI, CIA, State Department. That is catastrophic failure.
So would you be saying this, I'm going to ask you, would you be saying this if there was a Republican sitting at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office?
I have said that. And I have specifically pointed out the failures of the previous administration. This is not a political issue. This is a national security issue. The failings of the Republican Party are just as gross as those of the Democrat Party at all levels, not just at the presidential level. I mean, in Congress, when a year ago in August 2012, 5 Republican members of Congress sent letters to the inspectors generals of the key entities within our government asking if they would initiate an investigation regarding the penetration of our intelligence and security systems by the Muslim Brotherhood. It was John McCain, John Boehner, Marco Rubio, and people like that attacked those Republicans. It was their own party leadership. Those men are just simply incompetent.
So why did John McCain go to Syria?
I have no idea why he went to Syria. That's something you might want to ask him. But what I will share is the people he met with and the people he's defending. These are Al Qaeda guys. And when we talk about specifically Syria and the quote unquote rebels, while there are factions in the organizations and the individuals that are fighting against the Assad regime, you can't make a mistake. These are still jihadis.
So if the global war on terror is focused against Al Qaeda, John McCain goes to Syria and meets with Al Qaeda. What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah, I mean, I argue that at a minimum, that's aiding and abetting the enemy. You're giving them, at a minimum, propaganda to support their cause. And on the other side of it, what we're doing is we're preparing to, and in some ways already starting to give them arms. So just like we did in Libya, we are providing material support to Al Qaeda against the Gaddafi regime, what we did in Libya. Now we're doing it against the Assad regime. There's nothing rational or reasonable about this, and I would argue it's criminal.
John, let's go back to September 11th. What went wrong with the government after 9/11? What happened on that day that sent us to the track where we are now?
Well, I would say the two things that have really destroyed our ability to win this war. The first is we have yet to identify the enemy. We continue to identify the enemy in terms of groups like Al Qaeda, and really, in my experience, both in the FBI and since I left in 2008, the government continues to define our enemy or identify our enemy as Al Qaeda. And that is an extremely limited focal point of who we're up against when you have the Muslim Brotherhood as identified by the Islamic world as the leading element of what they call the global Islamic movement. You've got hundreds of jihadi organizations, Al Qaeda being the most prominent, but you've got Hamas and hundreds of others. And then you've got nation states organized under the Organization of Islamic Cooperation that all identify their objective as imposing Islamic law, and the vehicle to do it as jihad. That is the broader threat. So the first thing is we are at war and we haven't identified adequately the enemy. So you can't defeat an enemy if you don't define it and identify it. That's the first part. Second part is that we responded in war with bureaucracy, creating the Department of Homeland Security, this giant monster. And it's not just DHS, it's the bureaucracy was the response to war. And that's never appropriate. And our intelligence and security apparatus is broken. It is completely broken. So, and the American people know it because they watch a 25-year-old Muslim man walk through security cleared, or a clearly, easily identified jihadi by the way he dresses, by the color of his beard, working for TSA, while an 80-year-old nun is being patted down by a Muslim woman in hijab.
Well, I have to jump in there. What about the whole argument of racial profiling? How do you combat that in the workplace of the United States government fairly?
Well, that's the whole point. Is this is not about, well, we're just looking at this. What is the threat? What is the threat? And because we're not identifying that threat, identifying Muslim males that are 25 years old, that should be part of the group that we're taking a strong look at. Because
is the government more afraid of being politically correct or politically incorrect, so to speak, than they are of terrorism?
Of course they are. Absolutely. I mean, the fact that you have known leaders of Muslim Brotherhood organizations working inside the White House, working inside and briefing the National Security Council, all of which I've detailed in my previous writings and in my new book, Raising a Jihadi Generation.
You had mentioned that there are people inside the White House who have direct ties to terrorist networks, who are advising the president or people around him. Could you please go deeper into that?
Sure. And let me just start off with, back in the 90s, we had Abdurrahman al-Amoudi was the Islamic advisor to President Clinton and Vice President Gore. And he created the Muslim chaplain program for the Department of Defense. He worked with the Department of Education and the ACLU to determine what went into U.S. public school texts about Islam. And he was one of the leaders and founders of almost 24 of the largest Islamic organizations in America. And he was arrested in 2003 at Heathrow Airport with $340,000 he got from Muammar Gaddafi for the global jihad. He was extradited to the United States, to Alexandria, Virginia, where he pled guilty. And as the evidence showed, he was a financier for Al-Qaeda. And that guy was advising the president, and that was in the 90s. So today, that hasn't changed, and there's been any big break from that.
So he was the individual. What was his name again?
Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, who's now in federal prison.
And he was the head of the Muslim chaplain
program
in the military. So yeah. Who replaced him?
Well, actually, now the certifying agencies for the Department of Defense's Muslim chaplain program is the Islamic Society of North America, which is the largest Muslim Brotherhood organization in the United States per evidence in federal terrorism trials. And they were identified by U.S. prosecutors, by the Department of Justice, as a financial support entity for Hamas. And that's why they're an unindicted co-conspirator in the U.S. First Holy Land Foundation trial, which is the largest terrorism financing and Hamas trial ever successfully prosecuted in the U.S., which was in Dallas in 2008.
John, would this be considered that the government is aiding and abetting terrorist groups?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But they would argue, well, ISNA is not a terrorist group, but they financed Hamas, which is. And yet the head of the Islamic Society of North America, again, an unindicted co-conspirator in this trial, the largest Hamas trial in U.S. history, because it financed Hamas directly. I mean, the evidence that was presented was monies directly from ISNA's bank account went directly to known Hamas leaders and entities overseas. I mean, it's phenomenal. And the president of the Islamic Society of North America, or ISNA, whose name is Imam Mohammed Majid, has been lauded by the president's national security team as being a patriot. He sits on the Homeland Security Advisory Committee. He moderates panels at the CIA headquarters at Langley. He's been given awards by the FBI for being a great guy. This is a jihadi, and this is just one guy.
Are they doing this to be politically correct?
Of course, because this enemy comes at you wearing a suit and a smile saying, I'm here to help you. And the amazing and truly why I use the phrase catastrophic failure is that we use these individuals to be our liaison between the government and the Muslim community when they're easily identified as jihadis. One of the directors of ISNA, a guy named Louis Safi, who is also the president or executive director of two other major Muslim Brotherhood entities in the United States. After the Fort Hood shooting, he was there speaking to soldiers about Islam. And he accepted a check from the families of the victims of Fort Hood. Well, now Louis Safi is overseas working publicly on behalf of the Syrian rebels, who, of course, are Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda. I mean, this is insanity. And what's happening is, because of this, the decision-making process inside our government on our domestic counterterrorism affairs and our foreign policy. This ought to give your viewers an understanding of why our foreign policy is so upside down.
Well, let me ask you this about President Obama, because people have often said, well, he's a secret Muslim. And I want to ask you the question, is that a fact?
Well, I don't know. And I would answer the way I always answer is, I don't know that that's even relevant. And here's why I say that. is because his policies are obviously, clearly pro-Muslim Brotherhood, pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah and Iran, anti-Israel. He's diminishing and destroying our nuclear capability. What we're doing at the border is being diminished. We are clearly cutting back on our combat effectiveness and readiness, decreasing our naval forces, decreasing our infantry forces in the Army and Marine Corps. So it doesn't matter whether he is or isn't a Muslim. I don't know. But what I do know is he's destroying our national defense. He's watering down our national security policies. He has shut down all training inside the government that discusses what you and I are discussing, a factual understanding of the Muslim Brotherhood and jihadi network in the United States and what they're doing inside our communities, which is what my book is all about.
So I want to talk about the solution to the problem now, because you've identified that there is a catastrophic failure of leadership, and this is your claim. So moving ahead, we have the 2014 congressional elections coming up. We have the 2016 presidential elections coming up. How do we, as an American people, come together and try to resolve this catastrophic failure? What do you say to the American people that would agree with you on that issue?
Well, I would remind the American people that they are the government. We, the people, are the government. That's the first thing. That Americans who are not participating as citizen soldiers, which is what the founders intended, they need to get involved. And those that aren't involved need to step up. The leadership at the federal level is broken. I don't believe in the next 4 elections you're going to turn it around. I believe this problem, as I've articulated both to members of Congress as well as to governors, attorneys general at the state level and state legislators and local leadership, the answer to this solution is at the state and local level. Specifically from the jihadi threat, local police who get educated on this, working with their local elected officials, and propelled by citizens who will support them doing what it's going to need to take to get them out of their communities, to get these jihadis out of their communities. On a bigger issue to your question, it's at the state level, the governors who are going to have to finally exert their state's rights. You know, when this country was established, the power rested in the state with a framework of the federal government, which established itself for national security purposes, for interstate commerce, and to oversee specific duties and responsibilities as articulated in the Constitution. And the states need to reclaim those powers that have been stolen by the federal. And I would agree, or I would state that many of those powers were surrendered by the states and by the citizens to the federal government, which should never have rested in their control.
Well, definitely the 10th Amendment is an issue that we have covered here. We've had people from the 10th Amendment Center on who are a national activist movement to reinstate states' rights. That's a whole nother discussion. But John, thanks for coming on the program today.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me.
John, what was the name of the book again?
Raising a Jihadi Generation.
Okay. Is it available at Amazon?
It will be probably in the next few days. Yeah.
That was counterterrorism expert John Guandolo, the author of the new book, Raising a Jihadi Nation, available at Amazon. Stay tuned right here. We still have the rest of today's headlines. We've also got the weather and Hollywood coming up. We'll be right back.